A man named Mike said to me, quote, "My son Josh just doesn't seem to listen when I try to help him see what he's doing wrong," end quote. I said, well, let's see if we can figure out why. For one thing, you've only recently been watching the Ridiculously Effective Parenting Training, so you're kind of new at this. No accusation, it's just an explanation. It's only natural that sometimes you might not be as loving as you think as you're teaching him. Not your fault. Does that make sense to you? He said, yeah, I suppose so. But his tone of voice clearly communicated that he had told me about his son so that I would be sympathetic about how difficult the kid was being for his father. In other words, he was being a victim. Mike described how Josh picks on his younger sister, who's younger by, I think, 3 years. Teasing and bullying are very tempting. I mean, you take a kid who doesn't feel loved, picking on a younger sibling immediately yields a feeling of temporary power that's just irresistible. I asked Mike for examples of the behavior in Josh that he corrects, or examples of the behavior where he picks on his younger sister. And he described how Josh was unkind in some specific examples and teases her and points out what she does wrong. If she does anything and it inconveniences him, he gets annoyed. He virtually bristles when she breathes. He resents her existing. And I said to Mike, so good start. Give me a more specific example of a single interaction. Now, why did I ask that question? Because the devil is in the details. No kidding. It's often in the single sentences people speak, especially if you've got the exact quote, you heard it yourself, or brief interactions that they demonstrate where they really are in their lives, not what they claim to be doing overall. So Mike said, the other day, Josh was playing a video game. Apparently it was like the day before, so he could remember it. And his sister asked him a question, and he barked at her like a dog. "Can't you see I'm busy?" I said, that's a specific example. What did you do then? He said, I took him aside and I tried not to be angry. I couldn't help laughing. I tried not to be angry. In other words, externally you were less angry than usual, but you were still angry, and the kid felt it. But Dad continued, and I pieced together some of the exact sentences that Dad had spoken to Josh. Not all of them, but enough to give you a flavor. And then shortly thereafter, I wrote them down so you could have them. Dad said to Josh on that particular occasion, "You're not being loving," in about that tone of voice. That was probably milder. Is that true or not true? And that's me asking. Well, it's true. He wasn't being loving. Dad said to him, "You're only thinking of yourself." Again, true. "You have an unkind tone of voice." True. "If she asks you a question, you get irritated and you make her feel bad about herself." True. So Josh was selfish in all those ways that Dad named. Dad was right about everything he said. So if his father told him the truth, if he taught him, which is part of loving and teaching, why didn't Josh just say, "Oh, thanks, Dad. I didn't see that I was selfish before, but now I do. And from now on, I will be kind to my sister." I'd fall over dead if I heard that, I think. So why didn't he? Well, one, Dad was pretty inexperienced at loving, as we talked about. And I could tell from his tone of voice with me as he was describing it, that when he spoke to Josh, he was not feeling loving. If he was angry when he was talking to me, he was certainly angrier when he was talking to Josh. It guarantees that Josh will hear the "I don't love you" message from his father. And then Josh defends. Then Dad pushes harder because Josh is defending and not listening. And then there's more defending from the kid. Then the father controls more. We'll call it the great whirlpool of death. So one reason Josh didn't listen well was the lack of loving on Dad's part. Now, what about the teaching part? Because we're trying to figure out why Josh isn't learning this. How was Mike teaching his son? To illustrate, let's imagine that I'm teaching you to play the piano. So you sit down and begin attempting to read notes on a page, and I pepper you with comments like, too slow, or I just sigh, or roll my eyes. No, wrong note. No, wrong again. No, wrong fingering. Too fast. Out of rhythm. I just pepper you with those as you're trying to play. How do you think this is going to go? How do you think you're going to learn to play the piano from me? It will go very badly. Partly from my not being loving, yes, but also from the tools I'm using. Because I'm not telling you how to play better. I'm not giving you the information you need in order to play the piano. Instead, I'm giving you, more like hitting you, with judgments, with evaluations of how your playing is good or bad, which are not helpful. And it's unavoidable that you would take those as judgments of whether you are worthwhile as a person. That's what Mike was doing with his son, giving him judgments, not information. So let's illustrate. Using the exact phrases Mike used, let's illustrate how we as parents can offer helpful information instead. So what did Dad say? You're not being loving. Well, that's a judgment. That's not information. It was obvious as could be that he wasn't. And it wasn't useful information about how to behave better. He said, you're only thinking of yourself. Same, a judgment, not helpful information. You have an unkind tone of voice, just like me teaching you the piano, going wrong, bad, wrong note. His dad said, if she asks you a question, you get irritated and make her feel bad. Same, judgment. If we want to be more effective parents, we need to avoid throwing judgments at our children. Example, what could Mike have said to Josh that could have been teaching information rather than pronouncing judgments? Let's look at the same statements and change them. So first thing he does is he puts his arm around his son. He takes him away from the video game, puts his arm around him, which is loving. He looks him in the eye. You can do this same thing with your kids, by the way. Works pretty much uniformly. And then he asks Josh. Now, pay attention to the tone I use, because if you use a different tone, you're dead. They're not going to hear you. What did you just say to your sister? And you do this within seconds, so he will know. Nonetheless, the answer you're going to get almost every time is, I don't know. Like I said, when you're asking them for something, they act like they've had a stroke. So Mike, now smiling, because Mike and I are role-playing this, says to his son, yes, you know what I said. Take a minute to think about it. And then you're going to have to help him get to it exactly, to where the kid can finally say, can't you see I'm busy? And he has to do it with the tone that he used with his sister, which begins to make him feel a little ridiculous because he recognizes that tone and he doesn't like it. And it's really disarming when he is using that tone and you're not, as the parent who cannot become impatient during this entire discussion. Did you see her face when you said that? Then Mike says to Josh, so we already talked about, can't you see I'm busy? Now Mike says to Josh, did you see her face when you did that? Do you know how she felt or what she heard from you when you said that? Well, of course, Josh is going to say no. You're going to need to help him. If I said that to you, I'm busy, how would you feel? Now he's going to need help because he's going to find it difficult to admit how he'd feel or what he'd hear because he knows that he'll be admitting what she heard and felt from him. But keep going until he sees that she would have heard at least the following, again, with no tone. He was saying to his sister, "You are such a pest. You're defective. You mean so little to me. This video game is far more important to me than you are." And on and on. You keep going till Josh can see what he really said to his sister, because he said all those things with just one sentence and a tone of voice. Notice, this is all information you're giving him. You're helping him see what he really said. You're not judging it. He's just seeing what is the truth. Then to Josh, or you, to your child, do you want to intentionally say those unkind and mean things to her? Do you want to do that? Well, no. Even the most resistant kid will say no. So now that you know what really happened, how could you do it differently next time? See, now we're about to give information. And he's definitely going to need some help here. He's not going to be able to answer that. But it would include, for example, you could have just stopped or paused or even lost the game. Oh my gosh, lose a game intentionally. I mean, it's almost unthinkable. But you could have done that and just answered a question. That's one possibility. You could have worked out ahead of time a code in the family meeting. So for example, she asks you a question while you're playing and you hold up 2 fingers or 3 or 5 or whatever, which indicates that you'll be free to answer the question in 2 minutes. Now, at the end of 2 minutes, and she comes and asks you the question again, you have to be free. So you can't just say 2 minutes and then 2 minutes more and 2 minutes. That's one possibility. I'm not telling you which one to choose. This is options. This is information. Or you could have just answered the question. During the game, you multitask constantly. You're shooting the alien over here and the monster over here is shooting you, and there's a magician placing a spell on you and you're gathering coins and whatever. How hard is it to say, "It's in the closet," because she asked you where her shoes were? Or she says, "How many hot dogs would you like?" And you go, 2, and you're done. In fact, that's shorter than, "Can't you see that I'm busy?" with a snotty tone of voice. And then to Josh, you say, "And if you did one of those things," I just listed 3, you can come up with 10 if you'd like, "what would she hear?" Help him. She would hear that she matters to you. Again to Josh, "And how would you feel if you did one of those things?" Thoughtful, peaceful, not angry, kind. We just changed the entire discussion from hurling judgments, that's what Mike was doing, well, that's what Josh was doing too, to loving and teaching. Beautiful, beautiful parenting. Of course, we also need to teach children not to pester another child who's obviously doing something else. For example, you could teach the sister to say, "I have a brief question," and then he could go 2 minutes or whatever. So we need not to hurl judgments as parents. We need to teach our children how to ignore judgments and not be injured by them. Like, for example, a teacher at school or a sibling snaps a judgment at a child. You teach the child to remember that people speak badly only when they're in pain. It's not personal. It's a judgment, and in that moment, they're protecting themselves, not caring about you and giving you information. That really helps a child not to be hurt by things that people say. And we need to teach kids not to speak judgments to others, which we just did with Josh about his sister. Another father wrote me about his individual learning on this subject. As he's been learning this for the benefits of his children, he's been understanding himself better. He says, "I've never really understood the difference between useful advice and a judgment. All my life, I just accepted the judgment of others. But now I see that judgments are not acts of unconditional love. I'm learning not to care about or react to other people's judgments. I'm loving this." And I said to him, "Listening to judgments is an old habit that you learned from childhood when people judged you. And often the judgments were hidden in facial expressions and tones of voice. Judgments are unavoidably felt as praise or, more often, criticism. That's what the judgments are. You did good or bad. You made me feel good or bad. Both of which are crippling. We get addicted to earning praise and to avoiding disapproval. All from what? Information? Oh, judgment. Information doesn't cause those addictions. And this adult responded, this new way of thinking requires a really high level of ownership of my own feelings and accountability for my choices. To all of us, we can learn how to tell the difference between judgments and information. We can learn to love and teach, not judge. We can teach our children to do the same, and how to respond to the judgments that others will give them from time to time. That is a lot to learn and a lot to teach, and a big tool in our guaranteeing our happiness.